On a grim morning, the 23rd of February, in the year 1530, a somber atmosphere draped over Maidstone, a modest town nestled in the heart of Kent County, England. A growing assembly of townsfolk, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and dread, converged upon the central square. A stark wooden pyre, constructed during the night, stood as a chilling centerpiece, its base meticulously surrounded by bundles of kindling laid by watchful soldiers. A heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of feet or hushed whisper, settled over the throng, pregnant with morbid expectation. Henry VIII's England, a realm teetering on the precipice of profound religious upheaval, was about to stage another public spectacle of capital punishment for the grave crime of heresy. A contingent of guards soon emerged from the distance, their grim procession escorting a solitary, shackled figure. Thomas Hitton moved with visible effort, his frame emaciated and weakened by agonizing months of confinement within the frigid, dank cells of a prison dungeon, where the shadows often concealed implements of torture. Yet, despite his physical torment, his eyes burned with an intense, unwavering conviction, a defiant spark against the encroaching gloom. As he was led to the very heart of the square, the expectant crowd hushed completely. "Here comes the heretic," a voice pierced the silence, "the traitor who conspires against our faith." But who was this man, this Thomas Hitton, condemned to face one of the most agonizing forms of death prescribed by English law? What transgression had he committed to earn such a fate, a fiery end that would brand him as an enemy of both God and King? Thomas Hitton's journey toward this fateful morning commenced far to the east, in the marshy, windswept landscape of Norfolk, where he was born and received his theological education. Ordained as a Catholic priest, a position of immense societal influence and spiritual authority, in an era when the Catholic Church held absolute sway over nearly every facet of European life, Hitton seemed an unlikely candidate for the role of a religious dissident. However, the intellectual and spiritual landscape of Europe was then convulsing with the nascent tremors of what would irrevocably alter the continent's religious tapestry, the Protestant Reformation. Across the North Sea, in Germany, the defiant voice of Martin Luther had, in 1517, nailed his provocative 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg's Castle Church, openly challenging the Pope's undisputed supremacy and the pervasive practice of selling indulgences. Luther's revolutionary ideas, amplified by the groundbreaking invention of the printing press, swiftly transcended national borders, their challenging concepts seeping into even the relatively isolated British Isles. Meanwhile, in England, King Henry VIII found himself locked in his own escalating confrontation with Rome, after nearly 2 decades of marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who had tragically failed to provide him with the longed-for male heir essential to secure the Tudor dynasty. The monarch became consumed by a fervent desire to have his marriage annulled and to wed the captivating Anne Boleyn. The incumbent pontiff, Pope Clement VII, caught between the English king's urgent demands and the immense pressure exerted by Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, whose imperial troops had in 1527 sacked Rome and briefly held the Pope captive, steadfastly refused to grant the annulment. Henry, seething with frustration, began to seriously question the Pope's ultimate authority over the English Church. This, however, did not signify any inherent sympathy for the burgeoning Protestant reformers. On the contrary, the king had earlier penned a robust theological treatise, Defense of the Seven Sacraments, specifically refuting Luther's criticisms. This work had earned him the prestigious title of Defender of the Faith, Fide Defensor, bestowed upon him by Pope Leo X in 1521, a title ironically still held by British monarchs today. It was amidst this volatile and increasingly perilous religious climate that Thomas Hitton encountered the electrifying ideas of William Tyndale, a brilliant scholar and gifted linguist. Tyndale had undertaken the audacious and perilous task of translating the Bible into English. At a time when the Church maintained Latin as the sacred tongue for Scripture, this was far from a mere academic exercise. It was an act of open rebellion against established ecclesiastical power. The Catholic Church considered it outright heretical for common people to read the Scriptures directly, unmediated by the interpretations and teachings of the priesthood. Tyndale, relentlessly persecuted in England for his radical convictions, had sought refuge in continental Europe, where he continued his monumental translation work. His words, imbued with the fervor of his mission, resonated profoundly with Hitton. "If God spares my life for many years, I will cause a boy that driveth the plough to know more of the Scripture than many priests do." Around 1528, fully convinced of the truth and divine imperative of these reformist ideas, Hitton made a momentous and perilous decision. He abandoned his secure parish and embarked on a clandestine journey to the Netherlands. There, in Antwerp, a bustling port city teeming with merchants and ideas from across Europe, he joined Tyndale and other English religious exiles. He became an active participant in a sophisticated clandestine network that specialized in smuggling forbidden texts back into England. This illicit cargo included English Bibles, Protestant theological treatises, and other works deemed heretical by the English authorities. These books were often hidden within bales of cloth, barrels of wine, or other seemingly innocuous goods, meticulously avoiding detection by royal customs officials. In 1529, Hitton undertook his fateful mission, a return to England. His task was to contact secret sympathizers of the reformist cause and to organize the distribution of the Psalter, the Book of Psalms, which had been recently translated into English by George Joy. For Hitton, this was not an act of conspiracy or treason against the crown. It was a sacred, divine mission to bring God's unvarnished word directly to the common people in their native tongue, liberating them from what he perceived as ecclesiastical obfuscation and control. For several weeks, he traveled in daring disguise through the English countryside, meeting with fellow reformers in hushed taverns, private residences, and even within the shadowed confines of churches after nightfall. He carried with him coded letters from the exiles, offering updates and encouragement, alongside precise instructions on how to acquire and discreetly distribute the forbidden texts that would be smuggled ashore. His dangerous mission was nearing its successful conclusion when, in January 1530, as he approached Gravesend to board a ship for his return to the continent, his luck finally ran out. He was intercepted and stopped by Thomas Swainland, an officer acting in the service of Archbishop William Warham of Canterbury. Hitton's disguise, despite his careful efforts, had failed. Upon searching him, they discovered the incriminating letters and documents, undeniable proof of his illicit activities. Hitton was immediately placed under arrest and swiftly taken for interrogation. What followed was a harrowing period of ordeal. Brought before the venerable, yet stern, Archbishop Warham and the feared, staunchly orthodox Bishop John Fisher of Rochester, Hitton was subjected to relentless, exhaustive interrogations regarding his beliefs and his contacts within the reformist underground. Even under the duress of torture, he steadfastly refused to recant his newfound faith or betray any of his collaborators. It is against God's laws and good conscience for any man to swear to shed his own blood, he boldly declared when they demanded he take an oath to answer their questions, for thus he would be a murderer of himself and become guilty of his own death. His heresies, in the unforgiving eyes of the established church, were numerous and profound. He firmly believed the Bible should be openly available to all in the English language. He unequivocally denied the Pope's supreme authority over all Christendom, a direct challenge to the very foundation of papal power. He controversially argued that baptism would be much better if the liturgy was spoken in English, emphasizing comprehension over ritualistic adherence to Latin. And, most gravely of all, he preached the radical doctrine of justification by faith, the idea that salvation came directly from God's grace alone, without the need for ecclesiastical intermediaries, priestly absolution, or the purchase of indulgences, a direct echo of Luther's core theological revolution. Hitton's high-profile interrogation drew the direct attention of Sir Thomas More, who had recently been appointed Chancellor of England following the spectacular fall from grace of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. More, renowned as the author of the philosophical masterpiece Utopia, was also a fervent Catholic and a relentless, unyielding persecutor of heretics. He personally oversaw Hitton's case, determined to make an indelible example of him for anyone audacious enough to challenge the established religious order. This man is not only a heretic but a corrupter of souls, More declared after one of the interrogations, his voice laced with righteous indignation. He seeks to poison the people with false doctrines, more dangerous than any bodily poison. After weeks of grueling interrogations, punctuated by bouts of torture designed to break his will, Hitton was formally condemned for heresy by the ecclesiastical court. The sentence was a grim testament to the perceived severity of his crimes. Death by burning, the ultimate punishment reserved for the most obstinate and unrepentant heretics. Sir Thomas More, satisfied with the verdict, would later contemptuously refer to Hitton as the stinking martyr of the devil in his polemical writings against Protestants, highlighting the deep animosity and theological divide of the era. Finding Tudor fervor fascinating? Hit subscribe. It's less painful than a medieval interrogation, and we won't make you betray friends for forbidden books. The day of execution arrived. In Maidstone Square, Thomas Hitton was firmly bound to the stake, his body a silent testament to his convictions. A priest, representing the very institution that condemned him, approached, offering one final, desperate chance to recant and die reconciled with the church. "Recant now, and your soul will be saved," the priest insisted, his voice urgent. "Confess your errors and abandon the doctrines of Luther and Tyndale." But Hitton remained unyielding, a beacon of steadfastness amid the ominous scene. According to contemporary accounts, he responded with resolute calm, "I cannot renounce the truth I have found in the scriptures. If it is God's will that I die today for this truth, then let his will be done." The executioner, a silent, hooded figure, lit the pyre. The flames began their ascent, at first timidly licking at Hitton's feet, then rapidly growing in intensity, their hungry tongues consuming the stacked wood. Thick, acrid smoke billowed, making breathing difficult for the closest spectators. Some turned their faces away, unable to bear the searing sight and the sickening smell of burning human flesh. Contrary to all morbid expectations, Hitton did not scream. Witnesses reported that as the flames climbed higher, engulfing his body, he began to sing psalms in English, the very psalms he had risked his life to smuggle into England, their familiar words now rising as a defiant hymn. His voice, initially firm, gradually weakened as the smoke filled his lungs and the fire consumed him. "Look how a true martyr dies," someone in the crowd exclaimed, only to be quickly silenced by the grim guards. But the impression had been made. For many present, Hitton's serene composure in the face of such a terrible death seemed undeniable proof of the sincerity and profound strength of his convictions. After approximately 20 minutes of unspeakable agony, Thomas Hitton departed this world. His body was reduced to ashes, which the guards meticulously scattered to prevent them from becoming sacred relics for his burgeoning followers. The authorities believed they had extinguished a threat, but in their brutal act, they had inadvertently forged a martyr. Hitton's death did not pass unnoticed among the English reformers still living in exile. A year after his execution, George Joy, the very translator of the Psalter that Hitton had helped distribute, defiantly included in his new prayer book the commemoration of St. Thomas Martyr on February 23rd. This audacious act of unofficial canonization provoked the intense ire of Sir Thomas More, who viewed the celebration of a heretic as a direct insult to the memory of his own namesake St. Thomas Becket. William Tyndale, writing eloquently about Christian martyrs, drew a direct historical line from the blood of Saint Stephen, the first Christian martyr, to the blood of Thomas Hitton, elevating him to the pantheon of those who died for their faith. What Thomas Hitton could not have possibly imagined was that his death would be merely the harbinger of a long and bloody sequence of martyrdoms for the sake of religious conviction in England. Ironically, many of the very men who condemned him would, in history's unpredictable turns, face equally tragic fates. John Fisher, the bishop who declared him a heretic, would himself be executed in 1535 for refusing to accept Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England. His severed head was gruesomely displayed on London Bridge for 2 weeks before being cast into the Thames. Sir Thomas More, the relentless chancellor who scornfully called Hitton the devil's martyr, would follow the same path shortly thereafter, also beheaded for treason for denying the king's religious supremacy. History would transform these persecutors into martyrs of the Catholic faith, and both Fisher and More would later be canonized by the Church of Rome, a profound twist of fate. Henry VIII himself, after definitively breaking with Rome in 1534 through the Act of Supremacy, would initiate the dissolution of the monasteries, ruthlessly confiscating their vast properties and immense treasures for the crown. Although he largely maintained many aspects of Catholic doctrine during his lifetime, the monarch established a crucial precedent of royal supremacy over the Church that irrevocably paved the way for future, more radical Protestant reforms. William Tyndale, whose tireless work had so profoundly inspired Hitton, would be strangled and burned in Belgium in 1536 after being betrayed by an informant. His last reported words, a poignant prayer, were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes," a prayer that, in a profound way, would be answered less than 4 years later when Henry VIII reluctantly authorized the publication of the Great Bible in English, a version largely based on Tyndale's magnificent translations. During the brief reign of Edward VI, Henry's young son, England, would officially embrace Protestantism. The Book of Common Prayer, introduced in 1549, replaced the ancient Latin rites with church services conducted entirely in English. The very doctrines for which Hitton had died would become the official policy of the realm. However, the ascension of the fiercely Catholic Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, in 1553, would temporarily reverse these changes. Her 5-year reign would witness approximately 300 Protestants condemned to the stake, a bloody period that earned her the chilling moniker, Bloody Mary. Among these martyrs was Thomas Cranmer, the archbishop who had annulled Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine, enabling his union with Anne Boleyn, showing how the wheel of history relentlessly transformed executioners into victims and victims into inspirations for future generations. When Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, ascended to the throne in 1558, England would become definitively Protestant, albeit with its own unique characteristics that would distinguish it from both rigid Roman Catholicism and the austere Calvinism of Geneva. The Elizabethan era would see the flourishing of English culture, with literary giants like William Shakespeare, whose works would be unthinkable without the rich, vibrant language of the biblical translations initiated by Tyndale. The monumental King James Bible, published in 1611, largely based on Tyndale's foundational work, would become a literary and spiritual cornerstone of the English language, influencing generations. All this was still in the distant future on that cold February morning in 1530, as the crowd slowly dispersed from Maidstone Square, where Thomas Hitton's ashes still smoldered faintly in the chilling air. For many spectators, it was just another execution, a morbid spectacle to break the monotony of everyday life. For others, however, Hitton's courageous and serene death planted insidious seeds of doubt and questioning. Why would a man face such a terrifying death for a few pages in English? Some wondered. What profound truth could be contained in these forbidden texts that would justify such an ultimate sacrifice? These questions, initially whispered in hushed tones, would gradually become louder and more audible in the tumultuous years that followed. The guards who scattered Hitton's ashes did not imagine they were inadvertently spreading something far more powerful than mortal remains. They were dispersing ideas, convictions, a profound sense of purpose that inspires men and women across generations to risk everything for the truth as they understand it. Thomas Hitton, often called the first martyr of the English Reformation, the man burned for daring to think differently from Henry VIII. Few recorded words, few personal writings that historians can analyze. His enduring legacy lies not primarily in his words, but in his powerful example. It rests in the unwavering firmness with which he faced death, in the quiet courage with which he defended his conscience against the combined, overwhelming power of church and state, and in his resolute willingness to sacrifice everything for the fundamental freedom to read and understand the scriptures without the imposed intermediaries. 5 centuries later, few outside academic circles remember the precise name of Thomas Hitton. No impressive monument marks the exact site of his martyrdom in Maidstone. His sacrifice, however, was far from in vain. He belongs to that timeless lineage of countless ordinary individuals who, throughout history, dared to question what everyone accepted, to challenge what no one dared to challenge, and to illuminate new paths for human thought and spiritual understanding, even at the ultimate cost of their own lives. Hitton's story reminds us that behind the vast, transformative, religious, political, and social upheavals of history, there are myriad unsung individuals whose names history barely records, but whose blood, sweat, and tears literally built the world we now inhabit. Don't let history's most defiant moments slip by. Hit that subscribe button for more untold tales of courage and conviction.